They told him he had no future, but then his eyes awakened some crazy power. Right when some noble claimed a commoner could never make it to the top, he proved them wrong by becoming a mercenary with insane speed, until he took on the most dangerous mission ever, acting as a tutor for a Grand Duke's daughter. She totally roasted him and called him a sewer rat. But this teacher doesn't back down, and he teaches using pure brute force. His methods are wild, firing dangerous magic straight at his own student, just to turn that spoiled girl into a real ice weapon. The story takes us to the city of Ibelstein where it all began. There lived an old man known by everyone as the Proud Old Man. The people who lived in the city's slums called him by that nickname. He was only a one-star mage but bragged around saying he was an archmage. His temper was so bad that he would get angry even at children playing games. One day, however, the young Derek appeared before the old man, and it was from this man that our protagonist learned to use magic. There wasn't a big reason for the two of them to get together. The old man simply needed a follower to accompany him. So time passed, and the boy just needed knowledge. Soon after, spring came, bringing more pleasant weather. Throughout the seasons, the young man trained in magic tirelessly with his master. He worked very hard to be able to feel the flow of mana. Seeing this, the elder wonders if the boy has already mastered the flow of mana. At that moment, the protagonist's eyes shine with immense power. Then with his hand, he unleashes a spell. His magic takes the form of an arrow and flies towards a tree. The magical attack hits the tree trunk with impressive force. By doing tasks for the old man, Derek became a one-star mage in just 1 year. The old mage drinks while complaining about nobles who reach 3 stars at a young age. Turning to Derek, he says that a commoner like him will never reach that level and will give up. The master always said that bloodline was everything in magic and that effort was useless. Derek wondered if his master didn't desire something he himself could never achieve. On that particularly long-seeming night, the boy watched his master sleep. The next day, a heavy rain was falling, and the protagonist returned to his home. Arriving there, he found his master on the floor, having already passed away. The elder's body was completely covered in marks from a harsh beating. He assumed the old man had gotten into a fight and lost. But the boy later discovered that the city guards had harmed him. They said the mage was caught trying to steal a 2-star magic book from the warehouse. The protagonist then wonders why a man with no ambition would do such a thing. At that moment, a blue screen appears, and he remembers his master talking about bloodlines. The boy's expression turns serious, as he can never be a noble. The system window says he has mastered basic magic and needs to choose a primary school. This happens because the protagonist doesn't actually belong to that world. Thus, 4 long years passed, and his story continued. In the meantime, he met a woman named Katia Flameheart. Katia was a 3-star mage from a bankrupt and highly sought-after noble family. In Ebelstein, she worked for mercenaries and taught 1-star magic to Derek. The scene takes place in a tavern called Beldern's Tears. Inside, Katia says that Derek has talent and that it's normal for a mage to want more power. However, she warns him that excessive greed will only slow his progress. The white-haired boy agrees and says he will remember that. Then his master asks him to close his eyes and feel the mana around him. The protagonist concentrates to feel the origin and flow of his magical energy. As he does, a blue aura begins to emanate from the boy's body while he trains. Katia notices that he has a large amount of mana and very stable control. Suddenly, the young man's eyes glow and his magical power increases greatly. His tutor is impressed by the amount of energy he released. Soon after, a large explosion of mana shakes the entire tavern. The people there get startled and wonder what is happening. Derek looks at his hands confused, while the others think it was an attack. Seeing the situation, Katia grabs his hand and the protagonist asks what happened. She then asks him not to say anything and just follow her out of there. Outside, some mercenaries wonder about the explosion they heard. The mage quickly pulls him down an alley away from curious eyes. Not understanding anything, the boy follows her and calls her master once more. She stops and turns to her student, asking him to listen very carefully. The boy looks at her seriously and answers yes with a determined gaze. His master explains that nobles are very sensitive about their privileges and magic is the greatest of them all. Furthermore, innate power is treated as a blessing only for the nobility and commoners rarely advance. The few who succeed are people who have dedicated their entire lives to magic. She then reveals that what Derek used was a 2-star spell called Auditory Hallucination. A system window appears confirming that the protagonist has gained access to 2-star spells. After that, Katia continued teaching him and told him stories about the high society she was part of. A year passed quickly, and unfortunately his tutor had to leave the city. Count Elbester's family appointed her as a private tutor, and they were very powerful. As such, this was an offer his instructor simply couldn't refuse. Being a teacher for a noble family was a blessing, and she gifted him a magic book. With that, his list of acquired spells became quite large with various types of enchantments. Another year passed, and we see the boy holding the book he received as a gift from his master. Studying on his own, the young man learned 2 more 2-star spells from that same book. At just 16 years old, he had no intention of stopping his progress. Back at the tavern, a man tells Derek they've landed a real job. The white-haired young man then asks what kind of job they got this time. His colleague replies with a smile that it's a request from the famous Grand Duke Duplain's family. The protagonist is surprised and wonders why such an important family would seek them out. The man says it doesn't matter since the Duplains spend gold coins like water. He excitedly grabs him, saying this is their chance to build a connection for the future. With that, Derek asks what the Duplain family wants them to do on this mission. The man explains it's just to handle some monsters on the outskirts of the Grand Duchy. The white-haired young man finds this very suspicious and wonders why such a powerful family would make such a request. So he refuses to participate and tells his colleague to call someone else for the job. Turning away, he states that he doesn't do suspicious jobs and therefore won't accept the mission. His partner becomes desperate because they need a mage, and Derek is the only one they know. The young man questions why they would need a mage for such a simple task, but he doesn't want to get involved. Even so, the boy stands firm in his decision and prepares to leave the place. His companion then makes an offer of 1 idle gold coin as an advance payment. With the gold coin in hand, the young mage seems to reconsider his decision to refuse the job. Elsewhere, we see the clients who hired the mercenaries for this mysterious mission. There, Derek's colleague introduces him to the client, but the old noble doesn't seem impressed at all. The man with the monocle complains that the boy is just a child and that he expected someone more experienced. The mercenary then defends his friend, saying he is the most skilled mage he knows. But the noble isn't convinced and says the mission cannot be entrusted to a mere child. He then turns to his companion and decides to look for other mercenaries for the job. Suddenly, a mysterious figure in a blue hood and a golden mask appears in front of them. This person then turns to the protagonist and calls him for a private conversation. The scene then shifts to the beautiful landscape of the Grand Duchy of Duplain, where the mission will take place. There we see a goblin being struck down. The boy faces his enemies. He moves forward quickly and attacks the monsters with incredible speed, taking out several of them. Just then, one of the creatures tries to catch him by surprise with an axe from behind. But the young man dodges with ease and counters with his sharp sword. The youth holds the defeated creature with a serious and intimidating expression. Soon after, he uses an area of effect spell to finish off all the remaining goblins at once. Turning to the noble, he announces that the job has been completed successfully. The old man and his companions look at him with a neutral and unreadable expression. The hooded girl smiles and comments that he defeated the monsters quite quickly. Back at the Belden's Tears Tavern, night had already fallen on the city. A furious blonde girl appears and accuses Derek of becoming a noble's lapdog. His colleague holds her back as she screams that commoners shouldn't stoop so low. The man asks if Derek told her about the payment, and she wants to know the amount. He then holds up one finger, and she gets annoyed, asking if it was just 1 silver coin. With a smile on his face, the mercenary corrects her about the payment they received. The girl is in shock when she hears it was 1 gold coin, and her eyes gleam with greed. She then bows and asks to participate too, but her colleague tells her to be quiet. After drinking heavily, the mercenary girl passes out on the table, completely exhausted. Her partner asks about the job, and Derek says it was easy, but the clients were wealthy. The protagonist agrees but reveals that the 3 clients were lying the whole time. His colleague is surprised and asks if it's true that the clients were lying. Derek explains that the noble official had neither youth nor vigor, and the maid had very clean hands. Her hands were too delicate for someone who supposedly did manual labor. And finally, he found the inspector's apprentice very suspicious throughout the entire mission. With a keen eye, he realized the story they told made no sense at all. His partner says they are mercenaries and shouldn't investigate their clients' lives. The white-haired young man then nods in agreement and decides to drop the matter. The man reinforces that survival is what's important, and the rest doesn't matter to them. The next day, they return to the Grand Duchy of Duplain for a new meeting. Derek informs the group that the area is clear and the goblins won't be showing up for a while. With a smile, the mercenary praises his good work and immediately asks about the final payment. The old noble then hands over 2 shiny gold coins as a reward for their service. His partner is ecstatic with so much gold, and the protagonist tells him to calm down. The man with the monocle then clears his throat to get the 2 young men's attention. He praises Derek's skills and says he would like to entrust him with a new request. The protagonist's colleague is confused by the new proposal made by their client. Then, the noble reveals that the Grand Duke is offering 15 idle gold coins. With a serious look, the old man asks if the young mage will accept this new and lucrative mission. Without hesitation, the red-eyed young man accepts the proposal with a determined expression. And so, they set off in a carriage full of luggage for the location of the new mission. Arriving at the Duplain mansion, they are faced with a gigantic and luxurious estate. The protagonist and his partner are impressed by the residence of the powerful Grand Duke. Before they enter, the noble says he needs to formally introduce himself to the 2 mercenaries. He reveals his name is Dylan, the head butler, and apologizes for hiding his identity. Derek's colleague is flustered by the revelation and isn't sure how to act in front of him. The woman then introduces herself as Katerina, the head housekeeper of the enormous estate. Seeing this, the protagonist's friend hurries and introduces himself as Jaden, the leader of the mercenaries. Derek reflects that their positions are much higher than he initially suspected. Then the young mage and his companion look at the last person in the group with curiosity. The mysterious figure begins to remove her blue hood to finally reveal her identity. Her long dark hair sways in the wind as she reveals herself to the young men. The protagonist stares at her with a serious expression, waiting to find out who she really is. She is Aislinn Eleanor Duplain, the eldest daughter, who wants Derek as a tutor for her sister. The red-eyed young man is shocked by the proposal and wonders if he heard correctly. The scene then returns to the imposing Duplain mansion, where the story will continue. Suddenly, a door bursts open with great force, startling everyone in the room. A young noble storms into an office, shouting for his father and his brother Valerian. Seated at the desk, the Grand Duke asks his son Reg to maintain his dignity and calm down. The young man says Diella is the one who needs dignity, as she dared to harm his maid. The poor maid cries in fear and pain while being held mercilessly by her hair. The blonde brother named Valerian asks Reg to speak more quietly as they are in the middle of a conversation. Reg continues to complain that more than 10 servants have quit in the last month because of their sister. He then asks his father how long he will continue to tolerate that troublemaker. With that, Valerian stands up and yells at his younger brother, telling him to stop the scene. The blonde-haired brother glares at him angrily and tells him to stop talking and get out now. Reg falls silent for a moment, seeming to reflect on his older brother's words. Valerian says that even if Diella is a problem, they still have their sister Iselin in the family. With a dark look, Reg suggests that perhaps it would be better to send Diella away for good. The Grand Duke then says that this is not a decision for Reg to make about his sister. The youngest son reveals he has already researched monasteries and that it would be better for her to serve God. Suddenly, the father grabs Reg by the collar of his shirt with a restrained fury in his eyes. He then forcefully pushes his son's head down onto the table, showing who's really in charge. With a deadly glare, the Grand Duke repeats that the decision about Diella is none of his business. Even though he's hurt, Reg insists that eventually his father will have to make a tough decision about her. The Grand Duke is left with a serious and thoughtful expression after hearing his son's words. Elsewhere, Iselin walks alongside Derek through the luxurious corridors of the Duplain mansion. She then asks if the young man has ever heard of her younger sister named Diella. Iselin comments with a smile that her sister is probably not well known to the public. They then arrive in front of a large and imposing ornate wooden door. Upon opening the door, they find Reg and Valerian standing in the middle of the room. The blonde brother greets Iselin and asks how her stay in Ebelstein was. The young woman thanks him for his concern and says she is living very well, thanks to him. Valerian then points to Reg's injury and suggests they talk later. Meanwhile, Derek's red eyes observe the entire interaction between the siblings. The blonde-haired noble tries to tend to the wound on Reg's head with a cloth. With his intense gaze, the protagonist doesn't miss a single detail of that strange scene. The boy's gaze then turns to the frightened maid in the corner. He remains silent, but his face shows that he is processing everything he has seen. Back in the office, the Grand Duke tells Selin he is happy she is well. She then introduces the young man beside her as the new magic tutor for her sister Diella. Their father looks at the young mage with an analytical and very serious expression on his face. The noblewoman says goodbye, saying she will leave them alone as they must have much to do. But just as they are about to leave, the Grand Duke asks Derek to wait a moment. The young mage stops and looks back, not understanding what the noble wants from him. At that, the older man picks up a quill and begins to write on a scroll. He looks at him and comments that the boy is quite young, asking if he is 16. Sitting calmly on the sofa, the protagonist confirms that is his age. The noble asks about his magic and Derek replies that he uses one-star spells. The man with glasses lets out a small laugh while adjusting his monocle. With a serious look, he says there's no need to lie, as humility is not always a virtue. The protagonist remains silent, listening to the noble's words without showing any reaction. The Grand Duke reveals he is a 5-star mage and that humility doesn't work on him. The young man apologizes if he was disrespectful, but the noble says he understands the reason for his attitude. Even so, he states that based on his age and clothes, Derek doesn't seem to be the right person for the job. With a confident smile, the white-haired young man replies that he is just a mercenary. The Grand Duke says that since Iselin chose him, he will allow him access to the annex where Diella lives. He then dismisses him, but the protagonist interrupts, wanting to ask an important question. The older man then allows the white-haired young man to proceed with his question. The young mage explains that as a mercenary, he must complete the mission given to him by Lady Iselin. His job is to teach Diella magic and transform her into a true lady of high society. The Grand Duke stares at him and asks why he is stating something so obvious. With a determined look, the young man reveals that is why he has a serious request to make. The noble is confused, not understanding what the young mercenary could possibly want from him. In another room, a plate flies quickly towards someone with great force. The object shatters on the floor as a maid screams in fright from the sudden attack. The maid apologizes to Diella, but the young noblewoman questions if that changes anything. She then tells the maid to get out of her sight and threatens to throw something at her face next time. Back in the other room, Derek's colleague wonders why he, of all people, was chosen for this mission. Jaden comments that a noble family like the Duplains would have many teachers at their disposal. Selin reveals that they have already tried all the famous tutors, but they quit, and she was left with no options. Jaden says that Derek is a former mercenary but understands noble culture because of his old master. The noblewoman agrees, finding the young man refined, which is why she chose him to guide her sister Diella. At this, the protagonist's friend laughs and says she needs to learn to read people better. He reveals that the mage grew up on the streets and survived with much more than just good manners. The older sister is left with a thoughtful look after hearing the truth about the young man's past. Elsewhere, the protagonist is guided by a butler and a maid through the mansion's corridors. He then stops in front of a large double door that leads to his future student's room. With a closed fist, the young man prepares to knock on the room's door. He then raps a few times on the wood to announce his arrival. The young mage waits patiently outside for the noble girl's response. Hearing nothing, he decides to open the door himself to enter the room. Upon entering the room, the protagonist greets the person inside. He formally introduces himself to the young noblewoman who has her back to him. The blonde girl named Yahello then tells her new tutor to approach her. The red-eyed young man obeys and walks towards the family's second daughter. With a mischievous smile on her face, the girl throws a bucket of dirty water at him. The object hits him squarely, spilling all its contents on the young mage. Derek is soaked in dirty, but he maintains a calm expression. Yahello turns and insults him, saying she thought she saw a sewer rat enter the room. She then glares at him and says that on second thought, he really does look like a disgusting rat. The blonde-haired girl then gets up from her chair with a provocative look. Without caring about appearances, the noblewoman climbs on top of the chair. From up there, she throws the rest of the dirty water on him, mocking his humble origins. The protagonist remains quiet and still as the water runs down his face. In a mocking tone, Yahello laments that the water in the bucket has run out. But the young mage stares at her with a cold and intense gaze that makes her uncomfortable. Seeing his expression, the noble girl is surprised and a little scared. Then she kicks Derek. The young noblewoman is furious at her new tutor's audacity. Then she takes off her shoe and complains about the bad smell, covering her nose with her hand. And she throws the smelly shoe at our boy. She then humiliates him once more and questions if he can really teach her. The scene returns to Derek's conversation with the Grand Duke in the office. The powerful noble was looking out the window with a very thoughtful expression on his face. The girl's father seemed to be seriously considering his daughter's difficult situation. The protagonist says that his presence there proves that her problem has not been solved. Then he asks how much authority the Grand Duke is willing to give him. The older man looks at him with a serious gaze, analyzing the young man's request. Back in the present, the sound of a slap echoes and Yahello's face turns. After the action, the young noblewoman falls to the floor, completely shocked. The protagonist looks down at her with a cold gaze, showing no remorse. With a hand on her face, Yahello can hardly believe that a mere commoner dared to touch her. The mage's eyes glow red, and he tells the girl to wake up to reality. The scene then takes us 3 years into the past, in a cart traveling down a road. There, a young Derek asks his master Katia how one should teach a stubborn student. She replies that the ideal way would be to try to understand and accept that person in order to help them. The white-haired young man finds this very idealistic and asks what to do if that fails. The instructor says that if communication doesn't work, one must use a different starting point. With a somber look, she reveals that the other teaching method is to instill fear in the student. Back in the present, Yahello remains on the floor, completely paralyzed by what happened. The tutor tells her to get up and treat others with respect, as he will not repeat the warning. She then gets up and slaps Derek. The noblewoman is furious and asks who he thinks he is to dare to do such a thing to her. Unfazed, the young man hits the other side of her face with another hard slap. He coldly repeats that he will not warn her again about showing respect to others. The girl falls silent with an unreadable expression of shock and surprise on her face. Soon after, she starts screaming desperately for the mansion's head butler. Dylan rushes into the room with 2 maids to see what was happening. The butler reprimands him and threatens him about what the Grand Duke will do when he finds out. The white-haired young man then pulls out a rolled-up scroll from within his clothes. He shows it, revealing that the Grand Duke has given him full authority over Yahello's education. The head butler takes the document and is shocked to see the noble's official seal. The girl also seems surprised by this unexpected turn of events. Night falls over the enormous mansion. Through the corridors, Reg tries to calm his furious brother Valerian, who is running. The blonde-haired noble storms into a room and yells at the mercenary with great anger. Sitting calmly, the protagonist just looks at him in silence, holding a box. Valerian tries to attack Derek, but his younger brother stops him from doing something foolish. The young mage then informs them that the Grand Duke has permitted all of his actions there. Reg warns that their father gave permission, and that this could affect Aislin's position in the family. The older brother then tells Reg not to interfere and asks Derek to follow him elsewhere. At this, the other noble says that Yahello needs a lesson, and that his brother won't bother him anymore. The protagonist seems to completely ignore the dark-haired young man's words. Seeing the two leave, the young noble grumbles about why they should bother with a lost cause. In a dark room, we see 2 dolls sitting on the floor with a light shining on them. Valerian, the protagonist, arrive in front of a door, and the noble invites him to enter. He explains that this was Yahello's old room, which is now completely abandoned. The red-eyed young man then observes a beautiful painting on an easel in the middle of the room. The noble reveals that his sister used to enjoy painting and was adorable, showing him her works. The noble reveals that his sister loved to paint and was adorable, showing him her works. However, she never finished her paintings, only painting the parts she liked the most. The brother apologizes for getting worked up earlier, but Derek tells him not to worry about it. Looking at the paintings, the protagonist asks why the noble brought him to this room. He wanted to show that Yahello didn't deserve to be treated badly, but she became obsessed with bloodlines. Over time, she was expelled from the main building, and the young man doesn't understand what made her this way. With books in hand, the tutor says he needs to prevent her from going to the monastery at all costs. The older brother then grabs him by the shoulders and begs him to save the girl. At that moment, Derek pauses for an instant and seems to realize something. He notices notes in the books and understands that the young noblewoman has not given up on magic completely. The mage asks if those are books from the School of Discipline, and the noble confirms the information. When one more thing catches his attention, he then looks at a beautiful painting of a forest that was hanging on the wall of the room. Then he closes the book. With that, he hands the book back to the noble and says he will accept the job. The scene then shifts to the young noblewoman's room in the middle of a dark and silent night. There we see the blonde-haired girl sleeping peacefully in her luxurious bed. Suddenly, a bucket of water is thrown forcefully at her without any mercy. The noblewoman wakes up with a desperate scream as she feels the cold water soaking her entire body. The tutor looks at her and asks if she is sleepy, and the girl calls him crazy. He then grabs her by the arm and says they need to go somewhere while the girl curses at him. The young man drags her down the hallway, and she screams for the maids to do something to stop him. Ignoring her screams, the protagonist takes her outside the mansion in the middle of the night. Arriving at a field, he throws her to the ground forcefully, making the young noblewoman cry out in pain. The girl glares at him angrily and asks if he really thinks this will change anything. The tutor then asks if she wants to know something interesting, leaving her even more confused. With a frightening smile, he reveals that he only enjoys teaching a lesson to arrogant nobles like her. The young noblewoman is completely in shock at the revelation and can't say a word. He says that being a teacher is just an excuse for him and that commoners don't like nobles. The young man approaches and says that the screams of nobles are like music to his ears. At that, the tutor draws his sword, and the girl asks if he thinks he will get away with all of this. She says he won't get away with this. The young man responds with a smile that he will surely be fine in the end, that no one would believe her, and that at most, he would pay with his own life, since a commoner's life is worth almost nothing to them. The mage says he can also run away, and that the family would be happy to be rid of a troublemaker. With her eyes wide with fear, the young noblewoman realizes her life is in real danger. Realizing she needs to flee to survive, the girl gets up and starts running desperately. She then thinks she needs to hide in the forest to lose him and escape. The noblewoman believes that if she can escape to the mansion, he will be the only one who gets in trouble. But as she runs through the forest, the blonde-haired young woman feels a strange energy around her. Suddenly, a large and powerful fireball forms in front of her. The protagonist then launches the spell in the young woman's direction. The girl turns and recognizes the magic as a very powerful fireball. She is shocked because this is a 2-star magic spell, and he's supposed to be just a commoner. With a smile on his face, the young man prepares for the attack. He then launches the powerful fireball in the direction of the scared girl. The fire reflects in her eyes as the magical attack rapidly approaches. The young noblewoman screams and falls to the ground. Soon after, a large fiery explosion happens right behind the girl. The blonde-haired young woman turns around with an expression of pure terror on her face. Her tutor then says with a smile that he missed the attack on purpose this time. The noblewoman remains breathless and very scared, not understanding what was happening. She then tries to flee again but ends up tripping over a tree root. With that, the young woman falls hard on the ground. She mutters in pain on the ground but soon notices a new threat approaching. It was a blue mana arrow flying in her direction at great speed. Her eyes widen in pure fear as she sees the magic arrow coming at her. Luckily, the blue arrow grazes past her and hits the ground. The girl sees the magic arrow stuck in the ground. The young man says she moves well for someone who lives locked in the annex all day. Panting, the young noblewoman glares at him with determination and continues her desperate escape. She runs along the forest path while the protagonist just watches her from a distance. The young man lets her go with a calm and calculated expression on his face. The girl thinks she won't be able to escape and that at this rate, she will definitely be caught by him. With a determined look, she decides that she won't simply give up fighting for her life. At this, Derek crouches down and uses his mana to sense the tracks she left on the ground. The tutor then looks at the dense forest in front of him. He then realizes that this is the same forest from the painting that the girl loved so much. That was a place she had frequented since she was a child and had transferred its energy onto the canvas. The young mage gets a serious expression, confirming his suspicions about that location. Suddenly, the noblewoman appears and tries to hit him on the head with a rock, but Derek draws his sword. With a swift movement, he cuts the rock with his blade without any difficulty. The girl is completely shocked to see that her plan of attack failed miserably. The tutor praises her for her courage to attack instead of just continuing to run from him. Lying on the ground, the young noblewoman seems completely exhausted and with no more strength to fight. With a dark look, the protagonist says that she no longer has the strength to keep running. He then points his sword at the girl and asks if she has any last words. The noblewoman lets out a mocking laugh even though she is in a life or death situation. She tells him to get it over with because unlike commoners, she doesn't do pathetic things. The tutor then questions her about why she is so obsessed with this bloodline thing. The girl is silent for a moment, seeming to reflect on his question. With tears in her eyes, she says that if they take away her bloodline, there will be nothing left for her. She then starts to scream desperately that magic was all she ever wanted. Crying, the young noblewoman asks if anyone thinks she never tried hard to achieve it. The protagonist looks at her with a serious expression and without saying a single word. She says there's no point in trying because she always fails at everything, including painting. Desolate, the girl wonders what she would be without the status of her noble family. Lying on the ground, she questions her own existence if she doesn't even have her bloodline. The young man remains silent, just listening to the young woman's outburst. At that moment, the protagonist's sword begins to glow with an intense blue mana aura. The girl looks at him with a tear-streaked face, not understanding what is about to happen. The tutor raises his sword and says he heard her outburst about her fears well. With a cold look, he bids farewell to the noblewoman, as if it were the end of everything for her. Then he strikes. The girl then closes her eyes tightly, waiting for the final blow from her tutor. Tears stream from her eyes as she awaits the end of her miserable life. Suddenly, the blade is embedded in ice crystals. The young noblewoman opens her eyes in surprise as she sees the ice spreading around her. With that, a large ice barrier forms around her, protecting her from everything. Frightened, the girl asks if that is magic as mana emanates from her hands. He then sheathes his sword. The tutor congratulates her on her good work and apologizes for his rudeness. Still with tears in her eyes, the girl seems to be processing everything that just happened. He explains that it wasn't exactly magic, but she still did very well. With that, the young noblewoman begins to sob and cry with relief and repressed emotion. The girl then breaks down in tears and screams, releasing all her pent-up frustration. The protagonist just watches in silence as she cries, surrounded by the ice crystals. The night continues under the light of a large and bright full moon in the dark sky. After calming down, they sit down, and the tutor says that she belongs to the wild school. He tells her that most nobles learn from the school of discipline, but the fundamentals are the same. The young man reveals that her problem was trying to learn in a way that didn't work for her. The young noblewoman then asks how he knew she was from the wild school. The tutor replies that he figured it all out by looking at the paintings she made. He says that mages from the wild school feel the mana of nature from a very young age. The girl gets a surprised expression as she finally understands the reason for her failures. The protagonist stands up and says that she should be able to walk normally now. He warns her that there is still a long way to go, and that he will teach her how to manifest mana. The young noblewoman then calls him by his name. With her arms crossed and a little awkwardly, the girl thanks him for his help. The protagonist remains silent for a moment, just looking at the young noblewoman. Then he calls for her to leave, and the girl follows him out of the dark forest. On the way, he asks about the painting, and the noblewoman says it was her masterpiece and her first completed one. With that, the sun rises and a new day begins. In her room, the young noblewoman wakes up and sits up in bed with a serious expression on her face. She then extends her hand and begins to gather mana to practice her new magical abilities. Her eyes glow with blue energy as she concentrates to control the power. But the blonde-haired girl complains that she still can't control the magic properly. At that moment, a maid walks down the hallway carrying a bucket to the young woman's room. The noblewoman suddenly opens the door and startles the maid, who screams at the unexpected appearance. Startled, the maid ends up spilling water, which hits the girl. The maid is terrified by her mistake and apologizes desperately to the girl. With a cold look, the blonde-haired young woman just stares at the maid. The woman throws herself on the floor and begs for forgiveness for making a grave mistake in front of her. But the noblewoman just tells the maid to be more careful next time and leaves her behind. The maid is left confused, wondering why the noblewoman didn't harm her as she always did. The other maids appear and speculate that something must have happened to the young woman the night before. Meanwhile, in another room, the protagonist is sleeping peacefully in his bed. Suddenly, he wakes up to someone calling him. Still sleepy, the young man rubs his eyes and asks what's going on. At the door, Yahello asks him to teach her how to control mana, because she couldn't do it alone. The butler is shocked by the revelation and asks if the young noblewoman really manifested mana. With a determined look, she says that he promised to teach her and so he should hurry up. But the tutor asks them to come back later as he still needs to rest a bit. At this, the head butler gets emotional seeing the change of the young noblewoman's attitude as she tries to control her anger. The girl then starts banging on the door and yells for him to teach her right now. The white-haired young man goes back to bed while the young woman continues to shout from outside. The scene then changes. Two maids gossip that Yahello hasn't broken any plates or hit anyone today. They then comment that they heard rumors that the young noblewoman managed to manifest mana. Upon hearing this, the dark-haired brother immediately stops walking in the middle of the hallway. With a serious expression, he turns to the maids and asks what they just said. Soon after, we see the Grand Duke writing something. He asks if it's true that Yahello manifested mana, and Valerian confirms the news about his sister. Their father is very happy with the news and says that it's simply wonderful. But Reg says they shouldn't get ahead of themselves, as it might not mean anything in the end. Valerian gets angry and scolds his younger brother for not even being able to praise his sister. The Grand Duke just watches the argument between his two sons in complete silence. Reg then says that this doesn't change the past and that she should still go to the monastery. The Grand Duke remains silent with a serious expression, seeming to reflect on the future. The scene then changes again. In her room, the young noblewoman is sitting on the bed with a grumpy look on her face. The tutor then appears in the room and asks if she is pouting for some reason. The blonde-haired girl replies that she is not pouting, but very angry at him. The white-haired young man says that this petty attitude won't change anything between them. She then repeats firmly that she is not being petty, she's just angry. The protagonist looks at her and says that everything has its own order, and there's no use in complaining. With that, the young noblewoman gets really angry and shouts that she is not pouting, she is furious. The tutor just looks at her in silence without showing any reaction to her words. He then tells her to suppose she is pouting, and the girl gets a little scared. At this, the young man prepares to sit in a chair. He explains that manifesting mana doesn't mean she can overdo it, or she will get exhausted. The tutor says that the break is over, and the girl grumbles that he is a very stuffy teacher. With his eyes glowing red, he asks if she wants a less stuffy teaching method. The young noblewoman then remembers the night in the forest and becomes very afraid of what he might do. She quickly changes her mind and tells him to forget what she said before. The white-haired young man begins the lesson and says they will practice manifesting mana. He explains that the wild school has no structure and seeks more freedom than the other. With that, he reveals that the young noblewoman is well suited for the wild school, leaving her confused. The tutor explains that her temperament and the wild school are a perfect match. The blonde-haired girl listens attentively to her private teacher's words. With a flushed face, she asks if he is really saying that she has talent. He confirms it, and the young noblewoman asks if that means she is a magic genius. The young man says they are different things, but she insists it's the same thing in the end. Outside, Reg listens to their conversation with a very unfriendly expression. The younger brother then clicks his tongue, showing all his discontent. With that, a new day begins in the large and luxurious mansion of the Duplain noble family. The girl storms into Derek's room, saying she manifested mana but can't control it. The next day, she interrupts him at breakfast to show her progress with magic. Once again, the young noblewoman seeks him out to say that the feeling of her mana is strange. On another day, she finds him reading outside and asks what he is doing there. The girl scolds him for not staying in the annex and accuses him of just playing around. The protagonist replies that this is why her father lent him the magic books. She gives up arguing and says she managed to channel mana and asks him to check it. The scene shifts to a room where the noble Valerian seems to be waiting for someone. Just then, the door to the room opens, revealing the arrival of a new person. The older brother calls his sister's tutor and asks him to come in for a chat. Sitting across from each other, the noble asks how Yahello has been doing lately. The white-haired young man says she has progressed a lot, but it will still take time for her to learn. The blonde-haired noble informs him that their mother will return next week from a meeting. He continues, saying that she is not an easy person and that nobles don't like commoners. The protagonist replies that he will remember that and asks if that was all he called him for. The older brother remains silent for a moment, seeming to think about what he will say next. Then he reveals that as the future head of the family, he needs to accept and be sincere with everyone. The noble laments that this is difficult because people have different thoughts and values. Impatient, the white-haired young man asks what he is trying to say with all of that. At this, the noble raises his fist with an expression of frustration. He complains that his sister Yahello no longer wants to play with him like before, and it makes him sad. The protagonist looks at him with a bored expression, not believing what he just heard. Valerian remembers how his sister was an angel when they were younger and smiled at him. With that, he asks for a way to win Yahello's favor, and the tutor asks why he wants to know. The noble replies that it's because the girl just follows the protagonist around all day long. Then the older brother says he learned to make dolls from one of the maids in the mansion. He shows a scary-looking doll and asks if the tutor can feel his brotherly love. With a look of disgust, Derek asks if he is trying to curse someone. The noble gets upset and says that Derek is completely useless for helping with this matter. Time passes and the scene takes us back to the main hall. An older woman approaches Derek and says she has heard a lot about him. With a smile, she comments that she heard they found a very capable magic tutor. The lady introduces herself as Mariella Duplain, the girl's mother, and offers him gifts. The protagonist then asks which family the noblewoman belongs to. With a confused look, the older woman asks him to repeat what he said. With a serious look, the young man replies that he is just a commoner. The noblewoman is completely shocked and in disbelief at the revelation she just heard. With that, the scene takes us 1 week into the past, in front of the family mansion. Asura tells Derek that she thinks bringing him to the mansion was the right decision. She explains that she has to leave but will leave her younger sister in his hands to care for. The white-haired young mage simply replies that he understood what she asked him to do. At this, Jaden appears and says that the young lady trusts him and that his response was very direct. Inside the carriage, the mercenary asks the young man to finish the job and come back to them soon. The carriage then departs and the protagonist stays behind, watching them go. Suddenly, the nobleman remembers something important and her friend asks what happened. She reveals that her mother will be back next week and she forgot to tell him about it. Jaden questions if her arrival is something that really requires advance notice. The girl then prepares to explain a little about her mother's personality. With a worried look, the young noblewoman describes her as the very incarnation of fury. Back in the present, Mariella yells at her husband about a commoner being Diela's tutor. The Grand Duke then calmly asks his wife to speak a little more quietly to him. But the woman ignores him and continues to shout for her lovely younger daughter in the mansion. The Grand Duke tells his wife Mariella that he also doesn't like hiring commoners. She then retorts that even with the others quitting, he couldn't have just hired a mercenary. Her husband explains that it wasn't easy to find a good tutor and that Derek was recommended by Aislinn. But the noblewoman is not convinced and says there are minimum qualifications for this job. She then suggests calling her brother Flam now that Diela has finally managed to manifest mana. The head of the family scolds her for wanting to take an army commander to be a tutor. Mariella gets even more irritated and shouts that high society is also a battlefield. The woman says that a tutor is a calling card and a commoner will make Diela a laughingstock. At that moment, the office door opens with the arrival of another person. Valerian asks his mother to calm down and says she didn't come here to argue with their father. The noblewoman tells her son to stay away, as the issue is whether the commoner is qualified for the position. Suddenly, Reg appears and asks if qualification isn't the real problem of the situation. Their mother then smiles at her dark-haired son, seeing that he is on her side in the argument. The young man says that a commoner being a noble's tutor isn't normal, but it could be acceptable with proof. With that, Reg offers to test the protagonist's qualifications in a magic duel. But the Grand Duke interrupts him immediately and tells him to stop because Derek is a real mage. The youngest son falls silent with a look of discontent on his face. He then changes his mind and suggests that they test the young Diela instead of her tutor. The blonde-haired brother is confused, not understanding the reason for that strange suggestion. Rig explains that if the tutor is good, the student will be too, and that's why he will duel his sister. Their father remains silent for a moment, seeming to ponder his daughter's situation. Valerian then gets angry with Reg and follows him out of the room, furious with that idea. The older brother questions him about what he is thinking by suggesting a magic duel. The dark-haired noble asks if his brother has forgotten all the bad things the girl has done. But the blonde says she is still their sister and they need to protect her at all costs. The younger one then lets out a mocking laugh upon hearing the word blood come out of his mouth. He shouts that this bloodline will be the end of the family and that her debut in society will be the end. With a serious look, the blonde noble asks if that's how his younger brother really feels. The young man says the girl has crossed the line and that it's best for her to stay locked in the annex. The older brother remains silent with a thoughtful expression after the harsh conversation. With a determined look, the young noble seems decided to go ahead with his plan. Elsewhere in the mansion, suddenly Diela bursts into her tutor's room, shouting his name with great urgency. The protagonist, who is reading a book, asks what is happening so early in the morning. Then someone throws a scroll onto the book Derek was reading. Diela warns him that if she loses the magic duel, he will be fired from his position. The young man replies that he heard and that Reg is a one-star mage, so the fight will be very difficult. The young nobleman is furious at his calmness and yells that he's going to be fired either way. But the tutor replies that he is just a mercenary who completes the job and gets his money. He even adds that he has already been paid more than enough for that service. The young noblewoman is surprised and asks if he is really serious about the matter. At the duel site, the family and servants gather to watch the great fight. With that, the Grand Duke and his wife walk towards the arena. The noble then approaches the protagonist, who greets him for coming to watch the event. Derek bows in a gesture of respect. The girl's father notices his calmness and asks if he is confident in the duel's outcome. Sitting in his seat, the noble thinks that the young man has a lot of courage for the situation. On the other side, Reg walks towards the center of the arena with a very determined look. He thinks that this is not a simple duel. With an intimidating look, the noble tells himself that he needs to crush Diela today. As he climbs the steps, he thinks that he will make his sister regret her entire past. At this, Diela also begins to walk towards her opponent. Wearing a red hood, the girl faces her brother with a serious and focused expression. The scene then returns to the conversation way where she questions if he doesn't care about what happens. The tutor calms her down and says that her mana growth is on the right path to success. He reminds her that she was born with Duplain blood, and the girl asks why he is saying that. The young man explains that the wild school focuses on self-study instead of traditional learning. With tears in her eyes, the young noblewoman asks why he is only telling her this now. The protagonist then looks at her with a slight smile on his face without saying another word. The young noblewoman tells Derek that she knows she is not a great student for him. With tears in her eyes, she begs to continue learning magic with him and no one else. The protagonist remains silent for a moment, just listening to the girl's plea. Then he turns and says that he knows nothing about the rules of duels among nobles. But the tutor states that he can teach her how to win and asks if that's what she really wants. The girl then remembers all the insults she has heard throughout her life. People always criticized her and compared her negatively to her talented siblings. With a determined look, the young noblewoman asks him to help her win the duel. And so, the blonde-haired girl did not enter the arena as Reg's younger sister. She was also not there as the youngest of the Duplain family, but as Derek's student. The young woman was there only as a mage ready to prove her true worth to everyone. The Duplain family banner flutters in the wind, marking the beginning of the great event. With that, the girl in the red hood walks to the center of the arena with great confidence. An older man then clears his throat to announce the rules of the magic duel. He explains that whoever activates the opponent's protection circle first will lose the fight. Rig then says for them to begin, and the two siblings face each other, ready for combat. The protection circle is an accessory that activates a shield and nullifies the opponent's spell. The protagonist thinks that the duel lasts 10 minutes and that Rig plans to finish it before then. With that, the dark-haired noble begins to conjure a spell with a green aura. The young noblewoman prepares to receive the first attack from her older brother in the arena. The noble gathers a large amount of green mana in his hand to attack his sister. With an arrogant look, he says he will send her back to the annex with that blow. At this, the dark-haired young man jumps and launches a powerful magic attack in the arena. A green mana blade flies quickly towards the young woman in the red hood. But the girl faces him with a serious expression and without showing any fear. With an agile movement, she easily dodges her older brother's attack. The noble is shocked by her audacity and can't believe she dodged. Annoyed with the situation, the young man prepares to attack again. He then launches another mana blade, and the girl dodges the blow once more. The young noblewoman remains focused on the combat and continues to evade his attacks. The tutor thinks that she handles magic well but is a novice in actual combat. Suddenly, Rig's magical attack hits a large ice barrier that appears in the arena. The young woman then creates a huge ice wall to defend herself from her brother. The noble scoffs at her and asks if she thinks cheap tricks can block his magic. With that, he prepares a new spell and says that tricks like that can be crushed. The dark-haired young man then challenges her to try to stop his next magical attack. The scene then flashes back to the memory of Derek telling her to remember his words. He explains that a mercenary's way of fighting is different and focuses only on victory. The girl says that this is not a noble duel and that people might curse her for it. The tutor then questions if she is okay with that, as long as she achieves victory in the end. Back in the present, the young nobleman shouts that she is fine with it and accepts the proposal. With that, the girl runs across the arena, dodging her brother's attacks. She remembers that mercenaries who always win don't duel, they actually fight. These people don't follow duel rules, which is why they are victorious in the end. Her brother gets even more annoyed seeing that he can't hit her at all. The young woman continues to dodge. Their fight involves controlling the battlefield and using the terrain to their advantage. In other words, they use all necessary means to achieve victory. She once again blocks the attack with an ice wall. Yahello seems to be putting a lot of effort into this fight. The brother then says that this is the end of the line for his younger sister. The young noblewoman is surprised to see a new attack coming towards her in the arena. This time, the mana blade comes from behind the girl. A large cloud of dust rises in the arena after the impact. The protagonist watches everything with a calm expression. Seeing the scene, their mother screams desperately, calling her daughter Yahello's name. She then orders the butler to stop the duel because her younger daughter is going to get hurt. But the Grand Duke tells her to sit down because the magic duel is not really over yet. Her father explains that the protection circle was not activated, so she hasn't lost. The Grand Duke observes Derek, who seemed very calm watching the fight. He then realizes that the young woman didn't even blink and wonders if that was part of the plan. The dust settles and Rig walks across the arena suspiciously. The noble then wonders why the protection circle wasn't activated. Suddenly, he looks at a hole in the arena and is shocked by what he sees below. At that, the arena floor begins to break. When ice pillars erupt from the ground and hit the noble squarely, throwing him back. But at the last second, he managed to dodge. He then realizes that his sister is attacking from under the platform and is shocked. Rig questions the rules because being off the platform should mean her defeat. Even the butler was impressed. The noble then realizes that no one expected such a low tactic in a magic duel. At this, Rig gets up and stays alert so as not to be caught by surprise again by his sister. More ice spikes come out of the ground and the young man dodges. The entire arena becomes covered in ice and the noble doesn't know how to react to this situation. He thinks it's difficult to hit her without seeing her, but she only needs one hit to win. Rig jumps back and complains that there is no noble etiquette in this duel. He then looks at the hole in the ground and calls out his younger sister Yahello's name. The girl emerges from under the arena, completely determined. Rig recognizes that look and remembers Derek's calm eyes when he was confronted earlier. The young man then composes himself and faces his sister with a serious expression on his face. He realizes that the girl didn't think of this alone and that it was Derek's strategy to win. But, determined, the noble decides to play along with his younger sister's game. Then he throws his cloak to the side and prepares to fight her with everything he has. With a confident smile, the noble says he will play along with her bold strategy. Their mother is shocked and wonders how Yahello ended up under the dusty platform. She then yells for her husband to stop the duel, but he says their daughter hasn't broken the rules. The girl's father remains silent with a thoughtful expression, watching the fight unfold. Under the arena, the young noblewoman remains focused, surrounded by her ice crystals. With a focused look, the blonde-haired girl says that now she can see the flow of mana. An aura of blue and green energy becomes visible to the young mage under the arena. Rig begins to conjure a spell but realizes something is wrong with his magic in this location. Suddenly, a large ice spike emerges from the ground, forcing him to retreat to avoid being hit. He complains that every time he tries to use magic, she breaks the ground and prevents him from casting. With a furious look, the dark-haired young man refuses to be defeated this way. In the already destroyed arena, the noble tries to think of a way to turn the tables in his favor. The girl realizes that the flow of mana has stopped and suspects her brother is up to something. She then decides to wait for the right moment to attack if he tries to use magic again. The butler seems worried about what the young noble is going to do. Suddenly, the boy jumps and climbs up a tall flagpole. He thinks that from there, his sister won't feel his mana, but he can't cast either. At this, the young man decides there's only one way and gathers a large amount of blue energy. With a shout, he launches the attack and decides to destroy the entire arena without needing a spell. The protagonist watches the scene with a serious look, analyzing the noble's strategy. When the flagpole finally breaks and begins to fall onto the arena, the noble then jumps from the pole. As soon as the pole hits the arena, a huge explosion of dust covers the entire area. Their mother screams her son Reg's name in desperation upon seeing the dangerous scene. Amidst all the dust, the young man manages to land safely on the ground. With a determined look, he wipes his face and looks for his younger sister in the rubble. Suddenly, a figure runs through the dust, revealing that the girl is still standing. The older brother then creates a mana arrow in his hand to attack. Without hesitation, the young man launches the magic arrow in the direction of his younger sister. The girl notices the attack. With a quick movement, she uses her mana to create a shield. She manages to stop the magic arrow, but realizes that another attack is coming towards her. The second arrow approaches quickly, but the girl managed to dodge it by a hair's breadth. She runs around her opponent. The noble thinks he has the advantage if he can close the distance between them in the arena. But the young noblewoman hits him square in the chest with a kick. The brother feels the impact. Then Reg falls to the ground and grunts in pain, seemingly in disbelief of what just happened. At that, the girl picks up a handful of sand from the ground. With the sand in her hand, she runs towards her brother to use another dirty trick. The girl then throws all the sand in his eyes to temporarily blind him in the fight. The noble complains about the low tactic while the young woman seizes the opportunity. He wonders if she is out of mana and that's why she is resorting to kicks and sand to fight. The young man then understands that this duel is a fight for her to prove her worth to everyone. With that, he decides to fight seriously and face her with everything he has as her older brother. The girl faces her brother, who gets up from the rubble. The girl then feels a pain in her head. It was a wound that begins to bleed. The scene then flashes back to a memory where Derek teaches her to think of magic as painting. He explains that mana is the paint and the spell is the brush to create a beautiful image. We see the tutor showing the girl how to gather mana and create her own painting. The protagonist then reveals to the young noblewoman that that was true magic. The young noblewoman's eyes widen as she finally understands what he meant. Under a starry sky, the tutor shows her how mana can be beautiful and fluid like paint. Back in the arena, the girl closes her eyes with a new and strong determination. She understands that mana is the paint and the spell is the brush to create her own work of art. With that, an intense mana aura begins to gather around her entire body. The young noblewoman then feels the magical energy spinning at her fingertips for the first time. With a focused look, she tells herself that she will paint a beautiful picture with that paint. An ice lance forms in front of her, and the girl reveals that this is true magic. The butler is completely shocked by the scene. Their mother screams that her daughter is using a one-star magic spell and can't believe it. Reg says the ice lance will cause an accident and shouts his sister's name, very worried. But the blonde-haired young woman is unfazed and continues to prepare a powerful ice attack. Seeing this, the older brother also decides to attack with a blue mana spell in the arena. He charges forward and says that even with one-star magic, he is still one step ahead of her, and thinks he will hit her first and that the victory will be all his. The girl prepares to launch her final attack with all her strength in the fight. Reg then launches several magic arrows in the girl's direction. The two siblings' attacks collide in the middle of the arena in a great flash of light. With that, a huge explosion occurs and destroys what was left of the fighting platform. Their mother screams her daughter Yahello's name in desperation upon seeing the man explosion. The dust from the explosion begins to settle, revealing a sphere of energy. Then, the sphere turns yellow and begins to crack, indicating that Reg's protection circle has been activated. Panting, the noble can hardly believe he was defeated by his younger sister. The young woman is also exhausted and injured but remains standing victorious, and the protagonist observes the result of the duel.